Welcome everyone to another CTC Software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, the Director of BIM Development here at CTC Software, and today we are going to continue in the MEP Productivity Pack Project Startup Series with Part 3. As always, of course, our webinars are recorded, and also, of course, if you have questions about today's topic while we are talking about it, I encourage you to throw your questions into the questions window and go to webinar for those of you participating live. And I try to answer those live while we're going through the webinar itself, but also we save a huge QA session for the end. So feel free to stick around for that. Queue up your questions for that. If you've got questions maybe about Part 2 stuff, we can answer them there in the question section as well. But without further ado, let's jump into today's topic. So we're focusing very heavily on the MEP Productivity Pack, which in itself is a very powerful collection of workflows and content specifically for Revit and specifically for the MEP trades. But here's the deal. You need to be able to implement all of these workflows and all this content and all these tools in the most efficient and consistent way so you and your whole design team really can realize the benefits of the MEP Productivity Pack. And one of the biggest areas where we've noticed a lot of issues here is in the model startup tasks. The trick here is that when done right, it can really save hours upon hours of project setup. And it can also save throughout the life cycle of the project, days of project frustration by the end users, or just days of slowdown in time that you maybe don't quantify, you don't realize is there, but it really is. So in this part, Part 3, we're going to be focusing very much on how to efficiently load desired things like typical details, typical schedules, typical detail sheets. So depending on how aggressive you got on your template creation and how much you've pulled out or purged out of it, that you're going to know exactly how to bring those typical schedules, design schedules, construction document schedules, settings schedules, detail sheets, all of that back into your active model for the disciplines that you're specifically going to be working on throughout the life cycle of the project that you're on. So now technically, I want to be clear about this. You can technically do this particular step at any stage in the project life cycle. You may wait until a little later, but I'm going to discuss it here as a preliminary step in the project startup, specifically because those design schedules, if you happen to purge them out, or those settings schedules, if you purge them out, you may want those early on, and depending on what trades you're working on this project, you may need them earlier than later. And so I want to talk about it now, and you can also use this as a perfect time to bring in those detail sheets as well. If you know kind of the typical details, maybe you're working, say, in a California region, you have to have California-specific details. May as well bring them in because you're going to be working on stuff there anyway. You can bring them in now and have them as a part of your sheet set. So let's jump in and talk about what today's objectives are. We're going to talk about the standard workflow for importing these kinds of views and sheets. Out of the box, you can do this. You don't have to have tools for it. However, it's not quite as easy and efficient to do it. So what we tend to do with the standard workflow is just load up our template with a bunch of stuff because it sometimes is just easier. So I'm going to talk about the standard workflow so we set a common baseline. And then I want to talk about a more automatic method that you can use. You can actually have a slimmer template and yet still bring in the items that you need for a much more automatic sheet view detail type selection and import. We're going to talk about how to make that process as repeatable as possible to get repeatable selections, repeatable collections of content. And then we're also going to talk about just visually validating this. We're going to talk about some of the things we talk about, to kind of repeat, talking about what I just said, right? That's say what you're going to say it, what you just said. At that validate step, we're just going to kind of recap what we talked about here and just review some of the benefits of why you might want to work with this more advanced workflow. Now, I also want to review where we are here in the project startup as a whole. In different parts, we're talking about different major things. So in the project startup outline, you can see here on screen, in the previous 2 sections, we've already covered all of the open, the copy monitor, the reloading, all of this stuff. Creating plan sheets was part 2. In today's session, in part 3, we're going to be talking specifically about the importing of typical schedules and preliminary detail sheets and the schedules and details themselves and some of the nuances that you can deal with here. In future session, we'll be talking about creating spaces, zones, and doing some analysis. So let's first start by outlining what the traditional out-of-the-box workflow looks like. This is sort of the typical, how do I bring things into my Revit design environment? I'm not going to actually do this today because one of the downfalls of this is it can take a long time depending on how your, what I'll call warehouse files or container files are set up. So here, what I want to do is just kind of outline this traditional workflow. So first, in Revit, you would normally go to Insert, then the Insert from File grouping, and then the Insert Views from File command. That's the starting point for this. And then what you do is you browse someplace on your local computer for a model. Sadly, this cannot source content from BIM 360, so it has to be something on your local network. At least last I checked. Maybe 2024 has some new features, but in 2020, I know I can't browse BIM 360 for this. Then I have to wait for Revit to cache and potentially upgrade this model into memory. Even though I don't see it, it has to load it. And this is where some of the time slowness can come from. Then I go and select the sheet schedules and details that I want. And then finally, I load them into my project. Now here's the problem. When I'm browsing for models, as I mentioned, you can't really source this from BIM 360, at least not in the versions that I've checked recently. So users need to be attached to your network. They need to know where the warehouse model is located. They have to then select it and wait for it to upgrade and cache. Now, the upgrading and caching step here, I've seen this take anywhere from 1 to 20 minutes commonly. In the model that I have and the computer that I have, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes for it to cache. This is why I'm not going to do it today and not do this step live, because nobody wants to watch a 15-minute cache. In fact, end users don't either. And this exact reason right here is why a lot of the time we will take our template or starter project model and just load it up with a bunch of stuff, because this step right here can be cumbersome for end users. It's not efficient. Now, I'm going to show you in the next step how you can make this way more efficient. And then we go through the next final step here, which is to select our sheets, our schedules, our details. But in this environment, there really isn't a lot of what I'll call streamlined filtering. The only thing you can do is say, show me sheets or show me the views that are not sheets. And that's it. You can't really go in there and say, only show me electrical stuff, only show me mechanical stuff, only show me mechanical stuff that specifically is related to say analysis, right? I can't do that in this environment. I just have to scroll through a really long list of schedules or views or sheets, know what they're named, select them, and then hopefully I've grabbed the right items. And if I haven't, I get to go through that upgrade cache process again to grab more stuff. It's not the most convenient workflow. And so this is why I'm not proposing this as the workflow you actually do. I just want to make sure we set a baseline here. So let's talk about a more automatic workflow, something that's a bit more streamlined, a bit easier for you and or your designers or engineers to follow and do. So in the streamlined workflow, the very first step is going to be to access or open the Hive CMS. This is the same place earlier in this series in part 1 when I first started up with my template, my starter project. I opened it out of the Hive CMS. We'll come back to that a little later. Then you can search for sheets or schedules or details or a combination thereof. You can easily select the desired items that you want, and then you load them. There really isn't a lot of waiting around here because Hive has all of the information pre-cached for end users. Now, a key about this, let's talk about a couple of notes, and then we're going to go try this live ourselves. It's very likely that Hive is already going to be open. The CMS will probably already be open because if you're doing this as a part of your project startup, about an hour ago in this process, you probably used Hive to actually access your template. So you're already in there. There's no waiting around for that. You just access it and you run a search. With the search, there's really powerful filtering options that you have at your disposal. I'm going to show you some of these and how you can use them. And then later we'll talk about making it repeatable. The selecting of objects, one of the really key things here is that you can always see a bit of a preview of what it is you're about to select before you even load it. You can see this preview. Now you can see the preview in the traditional workflow as well if you individually pick one item. If you pick more than one and you're about to check more than one, the preview will disappear and you can't see the preview anymore. And that's kind of frustrating. So I like to be able to continually see both a small and enlarged preview while I'm going through my selection process. It makes it easier for me to see what's going on. You can also see extra details if you want to when you select one item at a time, but in this case, we're just talking about, how you can rapidly select a bunch of items. So we're talking about the mass multi-selection. That's kind of what we're talking and focusing on here today. And then finally, we're loading. And here's the key about loading. There may be a need to upgrade some of the items, but loading is actually far faster with Hive, because even if an upgrade is needed, Hive will do it on demand, and it's just a really small micro file because of how Hive stores the content when you're using the cloud cache system here. Hive CMS will actually load stuff and upgrade on demand really, really quickly. Or you can certainly preload upgraded content if you want to, so there is no upgrade time, and then it's just the loading time. Now, what we'll see today is the loading time, because I'm not going to load older content into my current template. I'm using the 2020 template, the 2020 workflows, and we'll be loading in 2020 drafting views, 2020 schedules, and 2020 sheets. So there won't be an upgrade, but it's going to be way faster than loading a 1 gig file, which is my warehouse file. It's nearly a gig in file size. We're going to be loading content, searching it, and loading content from it, but it'll only take a few seconds. So let's jump into Hive and actually try this, and then we're going to take a look at the next topic here. So I have Revit already open. I technically already have Hive open because, of course I do. It's the first thing I open in the morning before I even open Revit. I'll open Hive typically. It's actually a part of my automatic startup. Hive just opens because I've put it in my startup routine. Just a choice that I chose to make. You don't have to do that, of course, but that's one of the things I did. So here, what I like to do is go to the search tab over here where I've already got sort of a search pre-run. I ran a search for everything, so we weren't waiting for that. And you'll see here, I have 9,600 items available to me to find. And some of these items contain multiple version years. So I have in total about, probably 20,000 distinct versions and files that are available to me, even though it's only finding me, 9,652 pieces of content, right, approximately. But that's because it groups together version years. So what I want to do here is I want to narrow down my search results very, very specifically to just the MEP productivity pack. That's all I want to get back is the MEP productivity pack, and specifically my schedules, sheets, and details, which I've lumped into one library here just for simplicity's sake. I do have another library here that's all of my Revit MEP productivity pack content, including families and whatnot. But I have sort of a slightly newer collection of files that I'm testing out right now before we release 0.2, and that's what I'm using here. So this is where all my schedules are. If I was to kind of group together all of the stuff and just hit apply here, just want to show you what we would get back if I'm focusing on just Revit MEP productivity pack content, about 3,700 distinct files at my fingertips for just MEP, okay? But here in this case, I'm going to do a couple of very specific focuses. Since I'm looking at just 2020, I'm going to hit apply here. But let's look just at this version year since I do have 2016, 2018, 2019 content in this environment. I only want the 2020 content here, which kind of narrows it down a little bit to 2,400 pieces of content. In fact, I only want Revit stuff as well. And also, just because I'm only going to be focusing on that one library, let's just kind of narrow our results down a bit further. 269 sheets, schedules, and details at my fingertips. That could be 269 items in a list when I went to the insert up here, insert from file, insert views from file command. I could have 269 items to scroll through row by row, line by line, which I find to be very, very inefficient. So I don't work that way. Instead, I like to see all of my stuff right here, and if I mouse over it, I can actually get a slightly larger preview. Now, some of these schedules are a bit big, and I can't see quite as much detail. Some of them are a bit better, where I can see a bit more about what's going on inside of there. This is about the same size, the preview that I would get out of the Revit interface with the insert from file command. So it's not losing any fidelity here. Now with this, what I want to do is I want to maybe narrow my results down a bit. The whole goal here is that I have powerful filtration. It goes beyond just sheets and schedules and whatever. I can go in here and specifically say, show me drafting views. So I can just filter for views, which is drafting views specifically, hit apply, and now I'm going to get just, oh, I didn't put drafting views in here. Look at that. Well, let me switch libraries here for just a minute, and let's go find just drafting views. Explicitly the views themselves. 805 distinct drafting views out of Revit 2020, out of the MEP Productivity Pack. So there's a bunch of these inside of here that I can go find, load, bring in whatever it is I need. I could bring these in. Some of them have different names, of course, so they're showing me different entries here, but I could go scroll through and find any of these, like this floodlight base detail right here. If I mouse over that, I can see a bit about what that detail is. And if I wanted to load that, I could simply right-click and load this particular detail into my model, and it will load it, and it will throw it into the electrical subsection and organize it and group it like it's supposed to be organized and grouped in my project browser, because this is all coming out of the same project standard. So if I went to views, if I went to probably construction permit, electrical, let's go to, where would that go? Floodlight base detail. I may have set a filter on here. Maybe it's lighting? Might be lighting. Yep, there it is, lighting, drafting views, because it's a floodlight, of course. It's not just base electrical. So lighting floodlight base detail shows up here in the proper location in my project browser, being loaded in directly from Hive. Let's go take a look at a different thing here. Maybe I want to get just sheets. So let's clear this out and let's do just sheets, right? And if I wanted to go find a bunch of sheets, I get all the stuff. In fact, I've previously loaded this particular drafting view quite a lot, and it's not in my model right now. That would be the E600 sheet. But if I wanted that particular detail sheet here, if I mouse over it, I can see more about what's on there. If I wanted this particular detail sheet, I could simply right-click on this and choose load, or double-click it, or hit the load button, whatever. And the cool thing about this is going to give me specific access to every drafting view on that sheet. So if I wanted more than just the sheet, and I should say I want less than the whole sheet, I want just some of these drafting views, I could be very picky about grabbing just these drafting views and load them. Now, it wouldn't load the whole 604 sheet at this point. It would just load the drafting views off the sheet. So it's a really, really fast way for me to dig in and get exactly what it is I'm looking for. Or if I do want the whole sheet, I can simply hit load sheet. This is going to bring in 13 views and the sheet itself, and place all the views on the sheet and number them the same as it would if I was to do insert from file, insert sheet. So let's try this. This is coming out of a 1 gig approximately warehouse file, or a container file that holds all my stuff. I'm going to load this particular drafting view, or sheet rather, into my project. This lighting detail actually isn't a part of that sheet, so it's going to bring in 13 new details that are probably all data based. This looks like it's low voltage communication style stuff, since it's got network racking and whatnot inside of here. But bringing this in, it's bringing in all those drafting views. Now, if I was loading multiple sheets, it could bring them all in all at once. I'm just doing the one here in this case. Let's see here. Waiting for this to regen. It's going to pop up my sheet here in just a second. Give this a minute, and then once this is brought in, let's go take a look. So the electrical sheet's going to show up here, E-604 will show up here in my project browser list. It will also show me under that sheet all the drafting views that are placed, but the drafting views themselves will be grouped up in the views in my project browser, again, all in the correct place, because their properties are all maintained as they get brought in, okay? Now, while this is thinking, I also want to talk about some other stuff. You notice that I had been going to libraries. I've been filtering for just Revit content. I explicitly told this to sort by name, so the entire system is alphanumeric and not just trying to do some relevancy or popularity contest on the content. I've told it specifically sheets, and I've also told it specifically the version of Revit that I'm dealing with here, 2020. So it's giving me just that content here in this case. It's giving me these powerful, powerful filters. There are times when I want to make this very repeatable. I want to do this same exact thing over and over and over again without needing to go through the exercise of manually setting a search, a library, of sorting, a thing. So we can go through the exercise here of using this save option, a save search. And in fact, before I jump into that, let me pull this back to the foreground here and talk about some of these automated selections while that electrical sheet's loading in the background. With automating your selections, the nice thing about this is you do, again, have powerful ability to leverage those saved searches, either for yourself, or you can actually take these saved searches after you've run them and you can save them as a shared saved search. You can share this with the rest of the team. And you can really limit down which team members see which searches by using the group association, the group sharing within shared saved searches. So if you've got a bunch of searches that are isolated to, say, your HVAC team, and you've got people in that, great, let them see those shared saved searches. And you may have different searches that are relevant for your electrical team. Great, let them see that as well. The powerful thing about this is that you can have potentially hundreds of shared saved searches shared across multiple teams, but only the shared searches that are relevant to the team show up for them. And that way they're seeing maybe 20, 30 shared saved searches. It makes it much more digestible for them. And with those shared searches, I didn't do this yet, but I'm going to do this next. You can leverage tagging. Tagging is really powerful, especially when we're talking about sheets and details and schedules. And I want to show you an example of how this can come into play. So I'm going to pull Revit back to the foreground, Hive back to the foreground. It's still thinking. For whatever, I think actually Revit got hung up on something that I had previously cached. I'm looking at my screen to see if there's anything else going on here. It should be pulling it to the foreground, but it's not because Revit is upset. Okay, that's fine. Of course, I did this yesterday like 30 times and it works happily, and then I get into a webinar with GoTo recording it and it gets a little squirrely. That's just kind of how Revit likes to work when you're doing a webinar presentation. All right, so let me go over here and run a different search, assuming this wants to play and it's not just locked up on Revit over here. Again, Revit sometimes likes to be squirrely, and of course it does it when you're doing a live recording. Let me try doing just a different search real quick. I want to start to bring tags into the mix here. I've baked into my environment a bunch of tags. Of course, it's going to now want to refresh this because it's trying to do stuff in Revit as well, so I can't actually leave this expanded. That's glorious. I may have to just end task here for a moment and pull the model back up. With these tags, though, there's some options inside of there. You might be able to quickly see as it flickers on screen some disciplines. In fact, let's just go to the Home tab and go to tags here. There's some discipline-specific tags that I have. Discipline architecture, electrical, fire protection, interiors, mechanical, plumbing, structural. I built these tags on purpose. And I've run searches with these tags and associated these tags to different pieces of content so that it makes it that much more powerful a filtration. Now, I also added a couple of MEP specific filters in here for different project phases, and I've associated these to either sheets or drafting views or schedules, most specifically schedules. So I've got MEP construction permit, which aligns very closely with the construction permit phase in the schedules groupings. I've got design and analysis schedules in here for both MEP design or mechanical and plumbing design and electrical analysis style schedules. And then I also have settings and properties schedules inside of here for all those generalized settings. So if you want to quickly bring those types of schedules in and bring them in per a specific discipline, I've associated both discipline-specific tags and I've associated these tags, and I can use those in collaboration with each other to very specifically get narrowed down to just the area that I care about. So hopefully Revit's done thinking now. Let's go see. Nope, Revit's still being a pill because Revit. This is great. Let's, I'm going to actually end task on Revit because, yeah, I can see here it thinks it's actually doing a bringing in of information, but it's taking forever, and I don't understand why, because it should have been super quick. Normally this takes all of less than 20 seconds to actually bring in a sheet. But again, go to webinars recording. So of course, Revit is going to be slow. Let me jump back over here to the search. Yeah, and Revit and Hive both right now are being incredibly slow, oddly, which is abnormal. So let's go try and run, actually I think it's done now, but we'll come back and talk about this in a minute. Let's go run a search here for specifically schedules. In fact, let me use a save search. save search here, MEP schedules. This is going to run a search for everything that's in a particular library, that's schedules, and I want to add to this because there's 252 total schedules that are available here in version 2020. What I want to do is explicitly limit this down to the mechanical schedules for right now and hit apply. This is going to bring this list down to a much shorter list, in this case 181 mechanical schedules. And if I further filter this down, now keep that number in mind, 181, I'm going to be going here to, say, my settings and property schedules, or maybe my design analysis schedules here might be a good example. Now, this number is going to grow for a minute, and I'm going to show you why. I'm going to hit apply here. This number is going to grow. So it's going to go from 181 to about 190 something because it's going to have the electrical schedules in the mix as well, because I haven't told it to do something yet. Actually, it's 207 schedules. The one thing that you want to do when you're leveraging tags here, I'm doing design analysis and mechanical. You want to make sure that if you're filtering for this, that you tell this specifically that the content you're finding must contain both or all of the tags that you've chosen when you've tagged something here, so I can get compound filtering going on. If I don't do that, it could be finding me stuff that has DI mechanical associated or MEP design analysis associated. So I'm intentionally checking this box and hitting apply, and this is going to give me back now the 38 schedules that relate to design and analysis in this environment. Now I could very quickly take all these design analysis schedules, shift right click, or not shift right click, just I shift selected, and then after I selected all 38 items, I could tell this to load all of these schedules into my active model, and if they weren't already there, it would load them in. If they were already there, it would just use them. I could also forcibly reload these into my active model, and if the schedules were already there, what Hive is going to try to do is actually replace them with the definition coming out of the Hive CMS. So powerful option there as well. You can actually update schedules that are already in use in most cases, replacing them with what's coming out of the Hive environment. So nice little powerful workflow there. Now, I did see a couple of questions about, hey, Sean, where are you getting all of these? Because I maybe didn't know that I had them all. Where are these all coming from? Every single one of the drafting views, the typical sheets, the typical schedules, all of this comes out of the sample model that is shipped with the MEP productivity pack. So the Imperial and metric sample models, they have all of these schedules in them. I'm not doing anything that doesn't come out of the box from 20.1.1. So just to be clear, all of this is coming out of, let me just go find the file real quick here on my side, and then I'll show you where it is. I've extracted this to a content packs folder on my computer. Let me pull this across. I'm in the content packs for myself. I'm in the 20.1.1. And every one of my schedules and typical details and everything is coming out of the sample project, which I told you was about 1 gig in file size. It's 923 meg in file size. Everything that I've pulled in has come from this explicitly, 100%. All the details, the sheets, the system definitions, everything is right here in the MEP extracted folder, Imperial Sample Project. So that's where all mine come from. If you're using this as a metric user, you'd have the exact same thing with metric, sample project, and there's that exact same sample model, about the same file size, just about 1 gig. And inside of here is all of the metric equivalents of all of those schedules and typical details and sheets. So that's where I'm sourcing all of this content. And you could use this exactly with that old workflow that I mentioned of insert from project. You could leverage this particular workflow, but I've added all this stuff specifically into the Hive environment. All the families, the model groups, everything that's there, that's all sourced directly from that particular file. Okay. Now with this, let me minimize this. We're going to go back to leveraging these tags here that I was using. I'm finding what I'm looking for here by those specific tags. You can also do other filtration here as well. If you're like, well, hey, all I really wanted was the ASHRAE schedules out of my design schedules, I can filter down for just that. Again, this is stuff you can't do with the out-of-the-box workflow. So if I just wanted the ASHRAE table 62.1 workflow, I could specifically load that into my active model if it wasn't already there. Now, I'm not going to be loading any of these schedules, because in my template, because I always do the ASHRAE workflows, I always go through and leverage those design analysis componentries. I always go through and use the settings and properties. Those are items that I 100%, there's no ASHRAE settings files. Of course there's not. But in the MEP productivity pack, there's about 24 settings schedules that are available here for HVAC or mechanical. If I wanted to go to the plumbing side, I could say, well, give me all the plumbing settings schedules. There's 2 found for that, right? If I was to go and do the electrical ones, I could find my electrical settings files inside of here and reapply this. There's 6 for that one. So I could go through and take any of these guys, simply right-click and load them in. But again, my template, the way that I have it set up, I have all the settings and properties and analysis schedules pre-baked into my template. The only thing that maybe I pull out are the specific construction document schedules down here, because for those, I may only be responsible for part of the workflows, and I may not need all the construction permit schedules loaded. So if I wanted, I don't have any listed for electrical because I didn't tag them that way. That's fantastic. Let's do the mechanical ones since I did tag them that way. If I go to the mechanical ones, there's 110 different distinct schedules for construction permit. Well, I don't need every single one of them. I don't need every variant of the DOAS schedules. I only maybe need the heat pump, or maybe the DX gas-fired, or, right? Because I'm going to do different types of heating and cooling for a different project type. So I don't need the DX and electrical heat as well as the DX and gas-fired in the same project. So I can bring in selectively the schedules that I want for the supply and reheat and cooling properties I want on my project. That's it, right? I might use DX in one case or chilled water in another. So I can bring in specifically the schedule that I need that has just the fields that I need for that particular workflow, and that's it. I don't need to bring in every one of these because that just gets confusing for my design team. That's why I don't have them live in my project all the time. Okay, so let's take a look, and hopefully this loaded in as I would have expected it to. Let's do the final step here of validating the workflow. Let me just pull Revit back to the foreground. Look at that, it actually did load. There's my E604. It's grouped itself properly down here in my electrical collection, meaning it has, when we talked last time in the previous session, it has the proper sheet order on it, so it knows what sheet set it's a part of. It has the proper sub-discipline or discipline association inside here. Where'd that go? There it is, electrical discipline, so it knows where to group in the project browser. And of course, it has the right sheet number and naming convention on it, as well as, of course, all of my drafting views placed on here for those specific electrical details in that sheet collection. So there's very little that I had to do. I could just bring in the one sheet. I'm good to go. I'm off and running. It saves me a whole heck of a lot of time. On this sheet, of course, are all the typical drafting views, those typical details, and then up in my collection here, if I was to go to my systems, which is what these are, all of those drafting views are grouped into my systems collection because this is all of my systems typical, not all of, but that particular sheet of systems details. So I'm just making sure that all of my content is going to the right place because my warehouse file, where I sourced it from, had all the stuff in the right place, and my template is based on the exact same settings, right? So talking about just a couple of other aspects of this, let's just talk through real quick here. The Hive CMS basically allows you to locate all of your needed content. Now, today I was only talking about specifically schedules, details, and sheets, but I also want to point out that within here, I can very easily have all of my other content as well. Air terminals, terminal tags, duct accessories, duct types, pipe types, you name it. All that mechanical stuff that comes out of the MEP productivity pack, all of this content can be loaded into the same place. Your template can be loaded in here. So the whole point of this is that Hive allows finding everything and loading it all the same way. I don't have to do insert from file for sheets, schedules, and details, and then load family for a different workflow and insert model group for a different workflow and open a project with transfer project standards for a different workflow. All of it comes from Hive. All of it comes in the same exact way. So that's the key. All right. The other value about this is that for the most part, Hive is version agnostic. Now, I was specifically filtering for 2020 content today, but if I had older content in here, 2018, 2019, which I do, I could also load that previous version content without really worrying about it. And I don't have to wait very long for those upgrades. That's pretty key because upgrade times with the Hive product, the Hive CMS, are actually quite minimal. It just gives me what I need, so I'm only upgrading that which I need, and it does it very, very quickly. And this specifically, especially with sheets and schedules and typical details and systems, duct systems, pipe systems, duct and pipe types, those types of things, it's because Hive is doing what we call micro-caching. When I process something in, it's only caching to the cloud for that one item, that one thing, and it's one much smaller, not 1 gig warehouse file. It's caching it to like less than a 1 meg file. So it makes that loading process really quick. And then the key here is that you and all of your designers, your engineers, your techs, engineers in training, whomever, throughout the whole life cycle of the project, you can search and filter for whatever it is you need on demand. And then if you need to, you can simply, do these searches while you're even detached from the network, working from home, working from a job trailer, working from the job site itself, working from, say, a coordination meeting. It doesn't matter. As long as you've got an internet connection, you don't have to VPN into the office for this, and you can find this stuff and consume it. And even if that main warehouse file is hidden someplace in the network and is 1 gig in file size, you can still really rapidly consume that content live into your project. And what that means is that loading truly is speedy, aside from when I'm on a webinar and GoTo is making it really, really slow. And then once we're all done with this whole process, we're really on to the next step because we've loaded in all those typical details very easily through the Hive CMS, and we can leverage those shared saved searches. Now, I don't remember if I did this exactly and called it out in front of you, but right here, you can see I've got a bunch of MEP shared searches, and I have shared them with a bunch of team members in my office. I could go find specifically the ductwork. This is outside of today's conversation, but I can find specifically duct types and bring them in, so I could even purge duct and pipe types out of my project if I want to, conduit and cable tray types, and bring them in on demand. I can have all of those typical model groups that I was using for the plumbing design, for HVAC design, electrical design. I can have those. My previews don't look super sexy right now, but I do have all those typical details available to me, or typical model groups available. But really today's focus was on the schedules and the sheets and those details. So I can have those MEP details just sitting there at my fingertips and able to load them in on demand really quickly into my active project. So if I wanted a specific, say, California detail or sheet of details, I can simply search for that, and then those specific details pop up. And even if it's not a part of the view name, it's part of the view properties that there's California there, and I can find that real quick. Or if I had specific sheets that I needed to work with here, and not the views, but the sheets themselves, I could rerun that search and find typical California details on a sheet, load that into my project, and it's all good to go. Again, this is one that I use regularly, so it shows up here as that sort of peach color. So we're going to jump into Q&A here in just a moment. But first off, let's talk about where we are in this project startup outline, what we covered today. So in previous sessions, we've covered all the open, detach, reload, copy monitor, creating plans and sheets. And today we covered the import typical schedules and preliminary detail sheets into your project. The next session, part 4, we're going to be talking very specifically about creating spaces, zones, and analyzing your model, just talking about some of that workflow and using some of those schedules and perhaps the typical kind of analytical schedules that we've got. And then we're going to turn you loose and let you begin doing whatever the designing is that you've got to do on your projects. Because if you follow this workflow, you should basically be to that step in under 2 hours, maybe if it's a really big project, 3 to 4 hours. But that's the most it should take to get pretty much everything you need, all of the sheets, all the floor plan views, your typical details, your schedules set up for your project, ready to go for basically all disciplines. So for those of you who have stuck around this far, I want to say thank you. We're going to open this up for Q&A in just a moment, but for those of you kind of watching this on the YouTube environment, if you show up live to our webinars, you get to participate in the QA section that's coming up next. If you, also you can, of course, reach out to us and certainly ask us questions via email later if you need to as well.